A little bit about Noreen before we start. Noreen's been gardening on her Stonington property for well over 35 years. She grows flowers to attract pollinators, which in turn pollinate her vegetables, fruits, and fresh herbs. It has been a wonderful and rewarding experience. Noreen received her URI Master Gardener certificate in 2012 and has been sharing her knowledge about the importance of pollinators and gardening in general ever since. The vital link between providing a healthy habitat for pollinators and our own food systems has become a mission that Noreen is passionate about. So with that, I'm going to invite Noreen up here. Thank you to everybody here too. I know I'm talking mainly to the screen, but I'm very excited that you all joined us today, and hopefully this all goes out without a hitch. Thank you, Noreen.
You're welcome. First of all, I want to say thank you to my fellow gardeners for coming out at 2 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. Hopefully the sun will come out later. Thank you to Cassie and the Westerly Library for having me here today. And I do have to go through a few housekeeping slides for URI. So bear with me before we get to the program. So the URI, welcome to the URI College of Environment and Life Sciences and to the URI Cooperative Extension's webinar Learn at Home series. There are many topics to learn about, so be sure to check them out on the URI YouTube channel. Okay, Cassie, it's not advancing. Oh, got it. URI is a land grant institution, which means that it has a three-pronged mission: teaching, research, and extension. Cooperative Extension is the arm of the university that brings science-based resources out to the public. It exists in every state in the United States. We focus on 5 strategic areas: land stewardship, food systems and agriculture, water resources, energy efficiency, conservation and renewables, and healthy lifestyles. URI Cooperative Extension is committed to helping all Rhode Islanders and beyond through its webinar series. We hope to improve the quality of life, livelihoods, and the health of our environment. Please help us ensure that we are reaching out to all who might benefit from this information by sharing our webpage and social media profiles with your family, friends, and other networks. And just to let you know that URI does have a hotline that you can call. You'd have to go to the URI webpage to find the number and to know when it's open, but I'm pretty sure it's open 5 days a week. And they will answer any of your gardening questions. And if they don't have the answer, they will find out what the answer is and get back to you. So let's get on with today's program. So fall is upon us and the days are getting cooler and the days are getting shorter and the nights are getting cooler. So now is the time to clean up our gardens. But first, I'm going to encourage you to take a walk around your gardens and give it a close look and ask yourself some of these questions. What was successful and what was not? Are there plants that you planted for sun, but now they are in shade as your trees got bigger? Are there any holes in your garden where you could plant something new? Have any plants grown beyond their space and need to be divided? Can you attract more pollinators by planting more natives? After the heat of this past summer, I know I'm looking at my garden through different eyes, and I'm looking for more drought-tolerant plants because I feel that our climate is changing. And a lot of my annuals that I planted, they basically by July, they were fried. So I'm almost thinking that I'm not even going to do a lot of annuals, and I'm just going to look for drought-tolerant plants that can withstand. So I think as gardeners, we need to be aware of the bigger picture and change with that picture. So, but now is the time to make the changes or plan for them. Do not wait until the first frost to evaluate, because plants will die. And if you're anything like me, you will forget what they looked like or where they even were in your garden. So you want to look at your garden in bloom. So as you evaluate your garden spaces, take the time to see the monarchs and the other beneficial insects. They are getting as much goodness from the blooms as they can. The monarchs this year, at least in my garden spaces, were very abundant, along with many other types of butterflies. And last year, I decided that I was going to plant more native plants in my yard. And it really paid off because, and even people coming into the garden, they just couldn't believe the life that was around them, the native bees and all of the butterflies. So if you haven't planted natives, there are many wonderful varieties that are clump growing. Talk about a few of them as this program progresses. But the neat thing about the monarchs, and because we had the heat of the summer, sometimes gardeners, when that heat comes, we tend to give up on our gardens. And then we look out and we see a lot of weeds. Not that all the weeds are bad, but I keep pushing myself to go out and to work with my plants because the monarchs are coming. They go through 4 generations. And the last generation is the generation where they really need to bulk up. And they even look a little bit different. The monarchs that you see now are a little bit larger. Their abdomens are bigger because all they're doing right now is feeding, feeding, feeding. And if you give up on your garden in the middle of July, they have nothing to come to feed on. And, you know, I used to explain this to my 8-year-old grandson. If you're a butterfly, you're flying up high and you're looking down, and what you're looking for is an oasis or a place of rest or a place to fuel. And so if you think of your garden as like a fueling station, what is it? What plants are you going to put in it that are going to help these beneficial insects and these monarchs? So this last generation of monarchs, they don't lay eggs. They're not going to waste energy on that. All they're doing is eating because they literally fly, some of them from Connecticut to Mexico, go into that suspended animation in those special pine trees down in Mexico and start their journey back. And that's a very long way. And so what they're looking for from that aerial view is, where can I fuel up so that I can continue on? So I just had to say that about my monarchs. Fall planting gives new transplants time to grow and establish their roots. The work is easier on you too because the weather is cooler. And most garden centers or nurseries are now having sales on a lot of their perennials and a lot of their native plants, so you can get them at a pretty good price. So you want to be sure to water your new plantings. So anything you plant this fall, water them really well because those plantings need to take in that water and store it to ensure that they get through the cooler months. As you can see in this photo, you want to leave seed heads like these black-eyed Susans, but you can also leave cosmos, coneflowers, grasses, and other seed heads for the birds to eat. So an added bonus too is that it will save you work. You don't have to cut everything down now. I think as gardeners, we tend to be too perfect and too clean, and we don't want things messy. But the birds and the butterflies and the bees, that they don't care about that. They're actually looking for those little places that they can get into or the leftover seeds that they can eat. So these black-eyed Susans fell over after a storm. And what I did with most of them is I scattered some of the seed heads into my perennial garden, which gave the birds something to eat, but it also resulted in new plantings for myself for next year. And a lot of these stems, they provide a really good layer of mulch in your garden. So not everything has to be hauled off to the dump or put in the compost. You can use stems to work for you because they're a nice little blanket over your other perennials. So speaking of seeds, one of my favorite fall cleanup tasks that I enjoy is collecting seeds from some of my favorite flowers. And I label them and I let them completely dry in a cupcake tin. And then I either plant them directly in the garden in the spring. These would be seeds that would not like that coldness. Some seeds like larkspur and other seeds like to be that stratification where the cold has to break open the seed coat. But these are all seeds that will do well coming in, being dried, and then you can scatter them out in your gardens in the spring, or sometimes I will sow the seeds in little potting cups and then put them under my indoor lights, and they'll start growing in like February and March when I'm getting more antsy and I need to see something green and growing. So I had to put this in. This lovely vine is called Love in a Puff. And it has this delicate ferny leaves with these teeny white flowers. I hope you can see them. They're pretty small. And it grows about 3 to 4 feet tall, and it does need to be trellised, so make a good container plant with a trellis behind it. Or I just have this bamboo fencing around my pollinator garden, so I plant them on the outside. And it produces these exquisite lime green puffs that look like a Chinese lantern. And then when the lanterns dry, they become this nice little brown pod. And then you open up the pod, and inside there are 3 seeds. Seriously, if you grow this, you will not be disappointed. Love in a puff. Cute, right? Nature has placed a perfect white heart on each seed, and these can be dried and put in a seed envelope for next year, or I like to send them off on Valentine's Day to my friends who are gardeners. So these are just a really cute little, if you have grandchildren, they just totally love this little plant. As I was saying, natives are great choices for pollinators, and these are some native plants that will be planted into my garden this fall. And so fall is for cleanup, but it's also for planting too. It's a great time for planting. And some of these plants include the swamp milkweed. And I know you hear milkweed and you go, oh no, it's going to grow. This is a nice clump form. It's also called rose milkweed, and it forms in a nice clump, and the butterflies love it. Asclepia, which is the butterfly weed, or the orange, that orange butterfly milkweed that also butterflies love. Purple aster, liatris, and verbena bonarensis, which I have blooming, and they're like this tall right now, and the monarchs are all over them. These plants attract monarchs, swallowtails, skippers, and all kinds of native bees and beneficial insects. And all of these plants grow in clumps, so they will not take over your garden. You can leave them up for the winter, so their seeds feed the birds, or their stems, if you cut just the tops off on some of these plants, the stems are hollow. And that's where the native solitary bees will go in and spend the winter. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. So fall is also a good time for a soil test. I know a lot of us like to test our soil in the spring, but fall is actually the best time to test your soil. And ideally, you should test it about every 3 years. And both UMass and UConn offer soil testing beyond soil pH. So what that means is they're not just going to test for the acidity, they're going to see if there's lead or if there's any other bad things in your soil. But then they also give you, they measure the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the potassium, all 3 things that are needed to make plants healthy. But the soil test will also give you recommendations for the soil amendments. And fall is the perfect time to put those amendments into your soil, because those amendments will start working into your soil over the winter months. You don't want to be amending your soil in May when you want to start planting. Did that go or not? Anyway, instructions for a soil test are easy. You can test different samples for flowers, vegetables, fruit, or lawn. At UMass or UConn, each sample costs about $12. And healthy soil equals healthy plants and can prevent problems in the future. So I highly urge you to get your soil tested this fall. I garden in raised beds, especially for my vegetables. And I have noticed that in the fall, the soil kind of compresses down. So fall's the time that I always add in more soil to my raised beds, mixed in with compost and maybe a little bit of a slow release fertilizer. So it has time to work into the soil over the winter months. You want to water your perennials. Sometimes I forget this before you put your hose away. You want to give them a really good soaking. And your flowers will really like this water again during the winter months because the roots will store that moisture in there. After the first killing frost, you want to pull any annuals from their pots, and then you can discard them. You can cut your perennials at least halfway, or if they have a lot of seed heads on them, you can let them stay. And as I said before, if they have hollow stems, the bees will find those stems to, especially the small native bees will find those stems to go into for the winter. And then you could just pull them in late spring and they begin to grow again. You just don't want to pull too early in the spring because you want to wait for a couple of warm days to let those native bees emerge. Not the very first warm day as we get excited and we're like, oh, we want to get out there. So again, leave some up and let the bees have a chance to emerge, and then you can start your garden cleanup. I discard the roots of annuals, but I'm a little chintzy when it comes to soil. So usually like a pot like this, if you pull it up, the roots are probably in the top third, but in the bottom 2/3 is still pretty good soil. So I'll lay down a tarp and I'll start making a pile of soil that I'll save for next year. And then what I do come the following spring is I mix that in with some compost and another slow release fertilizer and add some fresh soil. And then I've got all that soil ready to go to be reused again. So I don't know if you want to try that, and just, you don't have to throw out your soil. So some veggies will continue to produce through the fall, and obviously we keep picking when that happens. But other veggies like these tomato plants will taper off and they'll stop producing. So after cleaning and cutting the top growth, you want to lightly rake your bed and expose the soil. And in doing that, you're exposing all the grubs and their pupae to the birds that will come down and eat those. They're little scavengers. They like clean your soil for you. And you want to leave that for a couple of days. And then I start adding organic matter into my raised beds for my vegetables. And I'll use, last year I just covered them all in chopped leaves. You could use compost, grass clippings, or straw. And you just mix it into the soil enough so that it won't blow away. And then you get your hose out and you wet it down. And you don't want to do it on a windy day. I garden in Stonington, and the first year I did that, my garden beds looked so great. And then I came out the next day and all the leaves were just all over the place and my garden beds were completely exposed. So lots of times with gardening, you learn through your mistakes. So this organic matter will decompose over the winter months and it will build humus into your soil. And taking care of your soil in the fall will give you a healthy start in the spring. So it's soil, soil, soil. I do cover some of my raised beds with this white clover. It grows about this high and it grows pretty quickly. You could also use winter rye or red clover. And this is a great way to keep your soil covered during the winter. You don't want any of your soil exposed during the winter months because all the nutrients and the nice minerals will just leach out. And this will also add nitrogen to your garden. And in the spring, it can be gently turned over back into the soil, or you can just lift it and discard it, put it into your compost pile. White clover can also be added to your lawn to build nitrogen there as well. And I'm not a big lawn person. I know some people really are, but I let the clover grow because I have a lot of bunnies. And the bunnies tend to prefer the clover and they'll eat that as they're sitting right next to my bed of like lettuce that is coming in, and they don't touch the lettuce. So it's like you have to outsmart the little pesky critters, I guess. These are permeable grow bags, and they're a great way to grow veggies if space is an issue. I just like to use them because I like to show people what they are. They come in different sizes from 20 gallons all the way down to 1 gallon. I know someone that took all the 1-gallon bags and put them in like a little grouping and just had a little herb garden there because she didn't have any room in her personal space. But in the fall, you just empty the grow bags of your soil, save most of it, rinse the bags with a hose, let them dry in the sun, and then fold and pack them away. And these bags, I bought like 8 years ago and I'm still using them. And I got them on Amazon. They're called a root pouch or a grow bag. Any plant debris can be put into your compost pile as you're cleaning up. You want to place diseased plants or weeds in the trash. But remember that your compost recipe should be 3 parts brown to 1 part green. Now you're going to say, well, what's brown? Brown is dried leaves, pine needles, or dead plants. And green is grass clippings, kitchen waste, and still green plants. And this is a meaningful way to keep organic matter into your garden. I know a man who gardens, and as he plants his vegetables, he takes another row that he plants next to his vegetables, and all his kitchen waste he just puts down as he's going along in the row, and his vegetables are beautiful. So that might be something you might want to try. After 2 or 3 killing frosts, your plants are going to go dormant, and you will want to protect them with chopped leaves or mulch, or some gardeners use evergreen branches or the stems of some of your perennial plants. This again helps put nitrogen back into the soil. And a good mulch layer also prevents early buds from forming when we get a few warm days in the winter, that late winter, early spring. And then you can just remove this layer after a few warm days, allowing the bees to emerge. I don't know if any of you grow dahlias. I'm a great dahlia grower, and they grow from tubers. And the tubers must be dug up after the first killing frost. And so what I do is I take an old paintbrush and I brush all the soil off of the tubers. Then I let them dry in the sun for a few days. I made the mistake of spraying them with a hose one year, and they were really, really clean. And I thought they were really, really dry. But when I stored them and took them out next spring, they were completely rotted. So I just start all over again. So you want to pack them in open boxes with vermiculite. That's the trick that I have found that works the best for dahlias. Store them in a dark, humid place like a garage or a basement. It has to be between like 40 and 50 degrees until the spring. And then you take off any rotted tubers or damaged tubers as you're taking them out. And then you plant them in the ground as soon as the soil is warm enough. Herbs such as chives, sage, and oregano are perennial, and they will die back, but they'll grow again in the spring, especially if they're in a southern exposure or if you plant your herbs with rocks. I always put a rock behind my herbs because they're really a Mediterranean plant. When you think of the Mediterranean, you think of sun and warmth. And so when you put an herb in front of a rock, the rock will absorb that heat and then it throws it back off to the plant. And I especially do that with my lavender plants. They will need a pruning in the spring, but other herbs such as rosemary, tarragon, basil are tender, and a good frost will kill them. So to enjoy those fresh herbs during the winter, I go out and I cut basically all of them right down to the ground. And then I put them in I do not wash them. I put them in a brown lunch bag, very highly technical. And then I label them, put freezer tape on them and label them, and I put them in my freezer. And I am enjoying that taste of fresh herbs all winter long in the soups or casseroles that I make. And the taste is superb. And if you've cut enough, they'll last you almost the whole winter. So that might be a tip that you might want to try this year. Fall's also a good time to take cuttings of any herbs, scented geraniums, or begonias, and you cut the new growth at the top. You bring it in and you dip it in water and then in root tone, which is a little white bottle. You can get it at Agway or probably Ocean State Job Lot. And it's a white powder that promotes root growth. And then you just stick it in water, and in 10 to 14 days, you should have new roots emerging. And then you allow those roots to grow, and then you have a whole new plant. Yes, you have to keep it alive during the winter, but if you have a sunny window, you should be able to do that. These, I do grow raspberries. So in early to mid-fall, you want to prune your summer-bearing raspberries, leaving about 6 of the strongest brown canes for every foot of your row. The fall-bearing raspberries, they should be pruned right to the ground after bearing fruit. And I have enjoyed, I actually plant my raspberries in a raised bed, and they behave very well there. Every now and again, one escapes, and I just kind of dig it out. And I picked raspberries for a month this summer, fresh raspberries. My husband goes out and fights the birds off that they compete with each other. And I realized that I had replaced some of my summer bearing with fall bearing, and now I'm eating fall bearing raspberries. So I would recommend the fall bearing because you get 2 harvests. These are strawberries. I have them planted in a big kettle pot because I tried planting them in my garden, and I had a very healthy population of chipmunks, which I'm sure none of you ever have. And I would go out, and the strawberry would almost be ripe, and they would take 1 bite out of each strawberry. So I'd find myself like cutting off the bite, really washing it, because like I just wanted the taste of strawberry. So this helps when they're raised up, but I also have to cover them. I put a row cover over them when the berries start producing. But you want to take off any dead leaves in the fall. And if a plant is 3 years or older, you just want to dig it up. And if it has a baby, then just put the baby in its place, and the baby will then start to produce. And then I cover the whole bed with straw as a little insulation. And then I uncover it early in the spring. Definitely your containers, you want to brush them out with any leftover soil. And then I wash my containers in a solution of 9 parts of water to 1 part of bleach. I just have one of those big sheetrock buckets, and I just dip them in, and then I let them dry in the sun. And one year I had stacked my pots, and they were too much of a similar size, and they got stuck. So I had a really hard time like finally unsticking them. So now I put newspaper in between the pots, and this prevents sticking, and obviously you store them away from freezing temperatures. Your tools. Sometimes we don't think of garden cleanup as our tools, but they're pretty important to us when we want them. So you want to brush any dry soil from your tools, and then wash them with your hose and let them dry. And then I wipe off my tools with a vegetable oil, and this prevents any rust from building up. And then I like to put them in this brightly colored bucket. I take the tools that I know I'm going to be using early in the spring. You fill the bucket halfway with sand. I stick the blade part in, and that keeps the tool sharp and clean. But also when I go into my potting shed, I know that I'm looking for like a bright yellow bucket, because I don't want to be searching for where did I put my trowel. So I have those just ready and available to go in the springtime. You want to be sure to shut off any outside water spigot before the first frost, and unhook your hoses and let them drain. You want to bundle and store, and any sprinklers, drain those out, and then make sure they're free of water and hung to dry. I have 2 rain barrels. Now my rain barrels, I don't use the water in the rain barrels for my vegetables. I only use them for my container plants, because the water that is hitting your roof is also filled with bird poop. And so that drains into your rain barrel. So you don't want to use water from your rain barrel on anything that's edible. But I drain my rain barrel by opening up all the spigots. Mostly they're down pretty low because I've used them up, but before the winter, because you don't want the water to freeze and then it will crack the barrel. Once drained, I turn the barrel upside down to get all the extra water out, because below the spigot there, you can see there's like maybe 18 inches where it's not going to come out of the spigot. You have to dump it. And then I drain and store any hoses that I might use with the rain barrel. And I replaced the rain spout diverter with a flexible extension to redirect the water away from my foundation and any outbuilding that I have. So you just want to make sure that where that water is flowing. Spring flowering bulbs should be planted in the fall, and this ensures good root development. Irises can also be dug up and divided in the fall. Some people don't know, should I do it in the fall, the spring? Fall's the best. And then you wait for the magic to happen. And I say that because I forget where I planted my bulbs. So when I come out in the spring, I'm like, oh, that's a cute little surprise that, and sometimes the squirrels will move them for you, and they'll be in places that you never thought that you would ever plant them. August, which I know we're past, but it's also, if you didn't know, August is also a good time to plant Swiss chard, early carrots, peas, spinach, and even lettuce. Many of these crops do better with the cooler night temperatures, and you can put them on, you can have row covers on hoops if you want to really extend the season. I just let them keep growing until, they're all harvested. Another thing that people don't realize is you can keep planting flower seeds like right through July and August. I had a bed that I dug garlic out of, and it was just sitting there, and I had all these zinnia seeds. So I threw the zinnias in, and I've got these zinnias now that stand about this tall, and everyone knows the more you pick zinnias, the more they bloom. So they're brightening up a lot of houses on my street. Houseplants should be brought in from their summer residency. You want to remove any dead leaves, repot any plants that have outgrown their containers. Keep them away from other plants to determine if they're pest-free from any plants you might have inside your house for at least 2 weeks. Otherwise, you're just bringing the pests in with you, and then you've got a problem. I like to spray them with this good insecticidal soap, making sure to get the underside of the leaves as well, because that's where the little critters and pests like to go. And I do this chore outside around this time, mid-September, and I leave the plants outside for a few more days, and then I bring them in, but still separate from my other plants. This is a messy area in my yard, and you can have a brush pile filled with leaves or dead branches, stumps, any messy area in your yard that stays untouched, and beneficial insects and native bees will call this place home for the winter months. And it also saves you a lot of work because now you have a reason to leave part of your yard messy. You want to mow your lawn as late into the fall as the grass grows, but grass left too long will develop brown patches in the spring because the snow will make it fall over, and then you'll wonder why are these brown patches. So just know to keep cutting it for as long as the grass is growing. And you might want to consider the last few mowings leaving grass clippings on your lawn, because that will add to nitrogen development in your lawn. I don't know if you can see the 2 native bees there on this sunflower, but they will work searching for pollen even after the first frost, especially our natives that are covered in fur. Their bodies keep them warm enough. And if any flower is still blooming in your garden, please leave it up for the bees and watch their diligence and enthusiasm, and they will work right through. I mean, last year I saw bees in my garden still in early December because I still had flowers up, believe it or not. So this was a bee house that was close to one of my gardens. And one day I looked, and there were little plugs of grass coming out of some of the holes. And I researched this, and I found out that it was a grass carrying wasp that's also a gentle pollinator. And it leaves dead insects in the holes for the larvae to feed on, and then it plugs the holes with grass. So this generally happens in July and August, and I noticed them at the end of July. So you want to, if you have bee houses, you want to make sure that they're out of the rain and sheltered. And mid-spring is the time to clean them up. I just get those little hummingbird brushes, and I just go in and out of each hole. But remember, you do not need bee houses in order to have bees. Just, again, leave up your hollow stems and the bees will find them. And fall is a great time to clean out your garage or your shed. And you might want to donate what you do not use to a school garden or a community project, because we all know that gardeners love our tools, and I probably have 3 and 4 of many of the same tool. Don't need all of those tools. You want to discard any chemicals that are old or are past their due date, and wait for a fall hazardous waste day in your area to take them to. And the whole point of being in your garden and putting it to bed and cleaning it up in the right, proper way is so that in the fall, when you're organizing, you'll be able to spend more time in the spring doing gardening. You don't want to be hunting for tools or looking for things. So the time spent now will pay off later. And thank you very much. I'll take any questions you have.